Just so you know, this is not me attempting to approach anybody in the guise of a candidate. What this is for me to attempt to acknowledge and pick back up on an effort to file criminal charges through the Department of Justice regarding allegations of a pattern of racketeering activity that had infiltrated the federal government and having it intentionally obstructed because somebody took the evidence, the reports, the claims, and what would have been the beginnings of the effort at actually filing an indictment that I necessarily needed to submit for review to the RICO Department of the Department of Justice in order to actually prosecute a case. Somebody took that and instead decided they were going to use it as part of a political campaign hedging strategy. And in the course of doing that, mischaracterized the actual charges and the gravity of the charges involved. And when they did that, they allowed for a form of default that opened up illicit currents of financing that resulted in crimes that were even higher risk than they were prior to these obstruction efforts. In connection with those obstruction efforts, one of the matters at stake was what I understand to be an attempt to cover up for an intentional default concerning the provider of insurance for many forms of municipal bonds. And in addition to covering up for these sort of strategic defaults, one of the things that was done was an attempt to try to use what should have been a filing for consideration in criminal racketeering charges to be used as insurance connected to speculation associated with attempting to address matters of default around the situation concerning Puerto Rico, as well as and prior to the verdict or the decision in a case concerning a default connected to Puerto Rico and a debt associated with Puerto Rico and public facilities in Puerto Rico was debt associated with a default on military housing and securities outstanding concerning military housing. I contend that both of them would have been covered and would have prevented for the illicit financial currents that then allowed for the financing of acts of terrorism that happened in the United States to occur had the original filing been received on time and acknowledged for what it was. It wasn't a substitution. It was an investigation of criminal racketeering that aided and abetted a conspiracy that contributed to financing acts of domestic and international terrorism. Absolutely 100% appropriately tiered to the level it was at. But it was not acknowledged and allowed to be accepted as that because somebody else intended to attempt to frame me and continue framing me while they use it as their own political risk insurance in processes that it now appears go back over 30 years. Now, I'm not the only one. There are other people that have been investigators and even prosecutors and or other kinds of people involved with attempts at the administration of justice that have been framed. Some of them have even been assassinated as part of these cover-ups, including in the last 20 to 30 years. But in the course of that, it is important to acknowledge this morning, as I discussed, that considerations regarding the situation in Puerto Rico are actually very, very important. One of the things that's important to know is that at some point in the last 10 to 15 years, there have been substantial protests at the major public university in Puerto Rico by the students and also staff and faculty that support the students in Puerto Rico. One of the major areas had to do with changes concerning policy by the state or by the official governmental entity in Puerto Rico concerning the public university. But also attendant with that was an increased recruitment in Puerto Rico using the university system for the CIA. The CIA had a specific intelligence analysis and recruitment center in Puerto Rico. I contend that this is of very extreme significance, specifically because of the role that Puerto Rico plays connected to the United States. My understanding is just recently Puerto Rico had its second official election concerning whether or not it would try to apply for as a state, a federal state within the United States of America. The first one was the summer of 2017. I was witness to election interference concerning the election or the vote for Puerto Rican statehood in summer of 2017. I contend there was also election interference concerning matters related to Puerto Rico's decision on whether or not to attempt to become a state in this past election. But in addition to the understanding of the election interference, the question regarding Puerto Rico's statehood or the status of Puerto Rico as a possession of the United States, or rather determinations around its status, are essential to understanding what was the intention behind putting a CIA recruitment center in San Juan, Puerto Rico. It's not a state of the United States. It was not at the time. It's also not a territory of a foreign country or under the flag or authority of a foreign country. Why was Puerto Rico specifically chosen for a particularized kind of experience related to recruitment associated with the Central Intelligence Agency? Why was the public university system of Puerto Rico allowed to be targeted for recruitment by and for the Central Intelligence Agency? I contend it has to do with mischaracterizations of concepts of assets, including concepts of fixed assets, so that they can be disabused through mischaracterization in illicit activities that are actually unconstitutional, and that Puerto Rico was a sort of jumping off ground for other highly illegal and illicit activities that were being done under the cover of sovereign immunity and in abuse of protections that might be otherwise accorded to people that were engaged in some sort of diplomatic service, allegedly under the auspices of the Department of State. The question then becomes one of in what manner was the debt situation connected to Puerto Rico intentionally manipulated or exacerbated in order to aid and abet and facilitate illicit activities connected with the illicit recruitment scheme for the Central Intelligence Agency in Puerto Rico. Associated with that would also be a consideration of the status of vacus and what does it mean that the United States, while it has the CIA recruitment efforts ongoing in Puerto Rico, also had a military base that was on a possession, or rather a territory of the United States, as opposed to an actual state and or accorded the status of a foreign military base in a foreign country comparable to other U.S. military installations in other countries, i.e., is it akin to acknowledging the status of being an occupation force and hence under those circumstances required to engage in legal requirements related to that status? Was there some other form of dispensation accorded to the presence of an American military base in Puerto Rico? Mind you, Vieques is officially American territory, in accordance with the manner that any other military base would be. This is important for consideration because I contend it also speaks to what's going on domestically within the United States and within states of the United States that have military installations and that are also within state constitutional systematologies where governors of those states identify or may articulate a specific concept of their relationship to a state military or state militia. And then this calls into question concepts of loyalty regarding the status of veterans in those states or active duty military within those states who may have aided and abetted processes of co-conspiring with local governors or local governments in intentional efforts to defraud or undermine the federal government system for ulterior motives.